Greetings and welcome to the channel. My name is Dr. Gyesie, transformational coach here at Inner Mileage and also Shamanic Leadership Guide, where we help folks understand the roots of their limiting self-belief and how to take transformational action to overcome it and live resonant lives right here, right now. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the shift from believing to knowing, which embodies the empath's alchemical shift after narcissistic abuse. How the empath shifts from believing to knowing after narcissistic abuse. So it's important to know that belief asks for permission, whereas knowing is sovereign. And when we speak of narcissistic abuse, we are not simply speaking of pain, we are speaking of a soul alchemy, a divine, often brutal refinement of the empath's spiritual instrument. And the shift from believing to knowing is not metaphorical, it is literal. It takes place in the nervous system, in the subconscious, and in the quantum field and in the aura. And for the empath, particularly one who confused love with rescuing or validation or connection and bypassing, this marks the death of the false self. This is very important, this point, the death of the false self. And this episode is your initiation into understanding the neuro-spiritual journey from illusion or believing to embodiment or knowledge. So let's start with what it means to believe, which is the sort of the pre-abuse mindset. Believing or belief is externalized trust. And for the empath, this begins in childhood because the empath is conditioned to believe that harmony is better than truth, to believe that survival depends on reading other people's emotions other than their own, believing that good means being silent, and believing that love is earned through sacrifice. And the empath often grows up in dysfunctional systems such as narcissistic families, religious dogma, collectivist cultures, etc., where belief is used as emotional currency for moral control. The psychological insight on this states, or at least the research does, that children in narcissistic systems internalize false beliefs because it helps them survive unpredictability. And this becomes their inner operating system, i.e., I must believe what others say to be safe. From a spiritual dimension, particularly in metaphysical traditions, belief is considered the lower octave of faith. In other words, it's useful, believing, but immature, because it is the cocoon stage, not the butterfly. In other words, you've probably heard this often said that believing requires no knowledge. You can only believe in things you do not know. So when the empath believes they must love me because they said they do, they didn't mean it, they had a hard childhood, or if I love them, they will change. This is all signs of outsourcing intuition, abandoning self-reality, and entrenching oneself in spiritual amnesia. All symbols of being under a spell. So how is the narcissist the initiator of death and truth? Well, the narcissist comes into the life of the empath, very charismatic, very controlled, chronically disconnected as well. But they don't just manipulate emotions, they fracture reality. They create an environment where nothing is stable, predictable, or safe, this narcissist. And this instability becomes the crucible where you begin to question your memory, your intuition, not because you're weak, no, not at all, but because they are intentionally using confusion to feel like intimacy. So when this happens, the empath tries harder, the narcissist becomes even more crueler, the empath sacrifices more, and the narcissist punishes even further. Until eventually the empath breaks, but in that breaking, the belief system of the empath collapses. and something sacred happens. And what happens is the empath stops trying to fix the narcissist. The empath starts to listen to their body, and they start to know. And in the Buddhist cosmology, in particular the teachings on suffering, or the Four Noble Truths, known as dukkha in the language of the Buddha Pali, it said that suffering is not merely pain, it's the friction between reality and illusion. And the narcissist magnifies that friction until the illusion is unsustainable. Similarly, just as Yeshua or Christ had to descend into hell before resurrection, the empath must descend into madness, betrayal, and annihilation to re-emerge in truth. So how does the empath shift from believing to knowing, from belief to gnosis? Well, how do you shift from sensory chaos to somatic clarity? Under abuse, the nervous system was under hypervigilance, and belief became sort of an addictive loop, rationalized the irrational. But once the body starts to reject the illusions, the panics, and all that, the empath realizes that the body speaks the truth that the mind is too afraid to accept. From a brain science perspective, the amygdala begins to associate the narcissist's presence with threat, even if no physical violence occurs. And this is embodied wisdom trying to override a conditioned self, you see? Excuse me. Then how do you move from cognitive dissonance to alignment with reality? This is where the empath begins to converge their thoughts rather than diverge. And the cognitive dissonance becomes so unbearable until the empath eventually lets go, not because they no longer love the narcissist, but because they love themselves more. This is how self-trust is built, not through theory, but through the crucible of abuse. Then eventually, all of this leads to energetic discernment, because belief is driven by emotions. Knowledge is about being energetically aligned. And the empath begins to recognize the signature of manipulation, such as tight chest, spitting thoughts, and walking on eggshells. And also, the empath begins to recognize peace, which was once unfamiliar. This leads to a place of embodied boundaries. Because belief caused the empath to comply. Knowing makes the empath unapologetic. Because boundaries no longer feel like walls, they feel like truth in action. And the empath doesn't ask for permission anymore. The empath walks in clarity, not in conflict. As a result, the empath is able to move from spiritual bypassing to being in their soul authority, or the authority of their not self. And after the shift, the empath begins to understand that spirituality is not permission to self-abandon or self-sacrifice. It's the call to self-return. And knowing becomes sacred. The empath becomes the oracle, the seer, the guide. Not because they read books, but because they survive distortion and embodied truth. So what are some signs to let you know that you've shifted from believing to knowing? You know this when you realize you no longer over-explain yourself, where you're able to walk away from confusion without guilt, where you trust your words more than the gaslighter's words, where you sense when energy is off, even before words are spoken, you just know, where you're able to grieve without looking back, and you understand that forgiveness does not mean re-entry or reconciliation. Knowing is not loud, it's not. It is quiet but unwavering. It doesn't debate, it discerns. And this sort of interoception in neuroscience is the ability to feel internal states and respond with intelligence. It's how you psychologically and physiologically enable your body to become a receptacle for knowing. So, why is this shift required for a light worker? Well, the empath's gifts cannot come online fully until this shift happens, because belief keeps the empath fragmented, pulled between inner truth and outer approval, that vacillation. But knowing brings the empath into union, into wholeness, into sovereignty, capable of reading timelines, holding energetic space, healing through presence, discerning unseen forces, and speaking without an agenda. And the empath cannot fully enter their calling while entangled in the illusion of rescuing narcissists. And it's important to realize that you weren't born to beg for love, you were born to become love. And from that vibration, lead. And this is the leadership that's needed in this new world. Not a hierarchical type of leadership, not a coercive type of leadership, but a radiant leadership rooted in truth. Rooted in truth. And knowing collapses timelines. Because when you know, you know. When you know, you no longer need time to prove it. You act now, align now, or walk away now. If this resonated with you, don't forget to type transform in the comment section. Let us know your experience. And know that the abuse you experienced was not your fault. But the knowing it delivered is why you're here. Let the narcissist have the illusion. Let them have it. And you walk with truth. And you know that truth doesn't beg. If this resonated with you, subscribe, share, and remember, when you know who you are, when you truly, truly, truly come into resonance, nothing, not even abuse can tell you otherwise. Because you're in a place of knowing in a way initiated by truth, capital T, truth. If this resonated, don't forget to type transform. Keep ascending. Peace.